Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Natalie Gochner. I direct the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute. So glad to have you with us today. We appreciate you joining us on a hot September morning. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes before we get started. We have disabled the share screen and audio features for all participants except for our panelists, but you will be able to submit your questions in the chat box for later in the event. We encourage you to do so, and we'll try to get through as many of them as we can in our final 30 minutes of the morning. Our communications director, Nick Thuriot, will help facilitate that. Thank you, Nick. Our discussion today will focus on the newly released Survey of Utah Working Parents, conducted in partnership with the Salt Lake Chamber. The report was authored by three terrific researchers at the Gardner Institute, Samantha Ball, Diane Meppen, and Kara Ann Byrne. I want to set the stage by commenting briefly. Utah has the third lowest unemployment rate and the sixth highest labor force participation rate in the nation. Employers throughout the state are competing to recruit and retain qualified employees. Working parents are an important labor resource in our state. This survey was conducted during this past summer, and it shows a majority of Utah parents with children under the age of 12 work full-time, and indicate there are a number of policies employers could offer that would support them in getting closer to their ideal balance between paid work and childcare. Today, we will talk with business and state leaders on the importance of a variety of family-friendly workplace policies to working parents and how policy preferences differ depending on population characteristics. Before I introduce our panel, I'd like to turn the time over to my colleague, Samantha Ball, who will share the top sheet results from the survey. Samantha, welcome, and let's turn the time over to you.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully I've shared my screen. So as Nellie said, this survey was conducted in June and July of this summer, and it provides important information to employers who are wanting to support their employees as they try to get as close as they can to achieving their ideal work and childcare arrangements and work-life balance. The survey begins by identifying respondents' current and ideal work-child arrangements, and then it looks at what family-friendly policies employees prefer, and it looks at it in a number of ways. So, for instance, it looks at how important specific policies are to employees in achieving their ideal work and childcare arrangement. It examines whether respondents and other adults in their household would prefer to work more if policies such as flexible hours, remote hybrid work options, high quality affordable childcare, and increased wages to afford childcare are offered by their employer. And then it also examines whether respondents would be likely to change their job, employer, industry if a new job offered certain policies. So I just want to begin by giving a quick overview of the survey respondents' demographic profile and their current work and child arrangements, and then I'll move on to discussing some of the report findings that are related to supportive workplace policy preferences. This slide shows there were 605 respondents. They were all parents or guardians of children under 12. The sample was large enough we're able to see some significant differences in circumstances and preferences among groups when they're broken down by things like gender, age, income, whether a household has a child under the age of 6, the nature of the household composition in terms of employment, and those types of things. But I do want to caution that the survey overrepresents respondents with higher income and education levels. Also, female respondents and respondents in older age categories, ages 35 plus, for instance, when you compare it with the general Utah population of parents of children with parents with children under 12. And this is important because the report findings show that circumstances and preferences for certain groups can differ. So for instance, the lowest income bracket, the youngest age group, and others can differ from the general population. So some of those totals might differ if all of these groups were accurately represented. So that's just important to keep in mind as we go through. And one final demographic it's important to mention is that 11% of respondents are in one-parent households. That's similar to the state population percentage for this group. And in the report, we see some differences in circumstances and preferences for this group relative to the general population. This next slide looks at employment status, both current and ideal for respondents who are in two-parent households. We can see that 2 full-time workers is the largest category currently with 37%. And when we add those households with 1 full-time and 1 part-time worker, we can see that 63% of two-parent households have 2 working parents or guardians in them. And we can also see that ideally more respondents would like to be in categories with 1 full-time worker and 1 part-time worker and 1 full-time worker and 1 stay-at-home parent. We also know that 92% of respondents in 1-parent households were working as well. The other part of this is looking at the ideal caregiving situation for respondents. So as you can see, 81% of respondents would ideally like to have themselves or a co-parent or guardian care for their children when they're not in school. From another question, we know that 73% of respondents are currently in that arrangement. Additionally, there were 43% who would like to have family, like grandparents, aunts, uncles, taking care of children. And that compares with the 35% who have that arrangement currently. One quick note, just in looking at this question, people were able to choose more than 1 category of caregiving because many families have kind of a varied approach to take care of caregiving. So after establishing the respondent's circumstances, preferences for their ideal work and childcare arrangements, the survey asked how important it is for an employer to offer certain different family-friendly policies. And I'm going to be looking at just the combined important and very important categories here. So that's combining the light blue and the yellow. And as you can see, wage and salary is the top with 86% saying it's important, and it's very closely followed by paid family leave and flexibility in terms of hours and schedules. Those are both at 85%, and 71% of respondents think remote work is important to achieving their ideal arrangement. So if we think back on previous slides, we can see that those policies support both the parents and households where all the parents and guardians in the household would like to work, as well as those who are in households where they would like to have 1 parent stay at home to provide care to the children. Another way that the survey looked at preferences was by asking respondents who were in households where at least 1 adult was not working full-time if any of 4 supportive workplace policies would cause them to work more. So here you can see that 70% said flexible hours would have this effect. 67 said that having a remote hybrid option would have that effect. 57 said increased wages to afford childcare. And 43 said finding high quality, affordable childcare would have that effect. And here we just want to say this is one of the questions where different groups rated the policies higher than respondents did overall. So one example is that there was a significant difference in respondents with children under age 6 in the house. Half of them, which is up from the 43% of the general population, said having affordable childcare would cause them to work more than they do now. Similarly, 54% of the youngest age category said finding high quality, affordable childcare would cause them to work more. And then finally, women also indicated high quality, affordable childcare was more influential for them than it was for other groups in terms of whether they would work more, with 49% saying it would have that effect. And women additionally indicated that flexible hours and remote work were disproportionately likely to have that effect. So 77% saying flexible hours would have that effect, 76% saying remote work would, and that's a 7 and 9% increase over the general population. Another way that the survey looked at work-life balance preferences was by asking, how likely would you be to change your job, employer, or industry if you found an opportunity that offered the following? So this is different than asking about the respondent's ideal arrangement. This is asking if this arrangement is enough better that they would incur kind of the difficulties of changing a job in order to have this associated policy. So for employers who are looking to recruit and support and retain employees in this competitive job market, this is important information for them. And we're looking at the red and yellow categories combined here. A majority would be likely to change jobs for flexible, predictable hours, about 40% for the next 3 options, and then 30% for on-site child care. And interestingly, when the next question asked for the most important policy, there was kind of a reshuffling here. And the most frequently selected policy was remote work, with 33% of respondents choosing that option as the most important. So even though not as many chose it initially, For those who chose it, it was a lot of them chose it as their most valued policy. And in fact, flexible, predictable hours, more part-time job opportunities that allow for career advancement, greater assistance with childcare subsidies, and on-site childcare all come before increased pay as the most important factor, which just kind of indicates that general increased pay can help the largest number of respondents get close to their ideal arrangements. But for most, there is another factor that is more important to them in achieving that. And then finally, through the open-ended comments in this survey, we can see that not only the importance of some of these policies we've already discussed, but also the importance of employer attitudes and workplace culture. The survey asked, is there anything an employer could do to make it easier to achieve your ideal work and childcare balance? And this was asked at the beginning of the survey before any of these policies had been discussed. So this is what was top of mind for people before they took this kind of detailed survey. And what you can find is that there was a variety of way of thinking about a lot of things, flexibility, for instance. So just reading a couple of these responses shows the variety. Allow increased work from home options, allow for flexible work hours during the day, avoid requiring commitments during hours that children typically need to be dropped off or picked up from school. Another said, when I was single, it was nearly impossible for me to leave work when one of my children was sick. If my employer had policies that were more flexible when it came to that and not losing pay if my child had to come home sick suddenly, that would have been life-changing for me. So from this, you can see that flexible hours could mean anything from just not having commitments during pickup and drop-off times to, in some cases, maybe having 4 10-hour days or something of that nature. And also there's an importance here of having employers understand the demands of raising children, reflected in the comment about losing pay if a child has to come home sick, and just the term life-changing is a high bar for a proposed policy. And it really underscores the importance of these preferences and the attitudes of employers to the respondents for this survey. That's all I'm going to go through here. I will say that there was a question about dissatisfied workers. There were 21% who said they were dissatisfied with their current arrangement. And there was another set of people who tended to have different answers, and that's in the full report. So I'll turn that back over to you, Lily.
Samantha, that was terrific. Thank you for such a careful presentation of what was a very complex survey. The report is absolutely fabulous. I read it yesterday. It's up online on our website at gardner.utah.edu. And I know Nick has put the link in the chat. Nick, let's also make sure we make available to everyone on the Newsmaker the slides that Samantha's just shared. So I'd like to introduce our panelists, and most of them will be able to turn on their video. I know that we've had at least one with some trouble, but we want to welcome Utah State Representative Susan Pulsipher. She was first elected to the Utah House of Representatives in 2017 and represents District 50. Representative Pulsipher is a South Jordan resident and an educator. Welcome, Representative Pulsipher. Great to have you join us. Sydney Tetro joins us. Sydney is currently the CEO of Brandless, a technology-based consumer platform. She's one of Utah's most tech-connected leaders and the president and co-founder of the Women's Tech Council. She's also well-informed on childcare issues. So welcome, Sydney. Great to have you. And Nick Dunn joins us. Nick was recently named Vice President of Strategy and Communications at the Sutherland Institute. Prior to his new role, he served as the director of the Utah Community Builders Foundation at the Salt Lake Chamber. Welcome, Nick. Great to see you, and glad you can join us this morning. Nick, I'd like to start with you and just ask what motivated the Salt Lake Chamber to commission this survey, and what is the Utah Community Builders?
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you, Samantha, for that presentation, and everyone at the Gardner Institute for the work on this survey. That your question, Natalie, gets at the heart of the intent of the Utah Community Builders Foundation and ties into the purpose of this research that we hope will be very helpful to employers. So for the very quick background version, Utah Community Builders is the Salt Lake Chamber's 501c3 nonprofit social impact foundation. It was created with the intent of helping the business community engage with issues that have more of a direct impact on our communities, our families, those social impact issues that are still important to businesses, but might be outside sort of the traditional, purely policy focused realm of the work that the chamber does and has been doing for a number of years with great success. And so Utah Community Builders focuses on 3 issues: poverty, mental health, and childcare and family policy. And so in that third bucket is when we approached the team at the Gardner Institute to try and really dive into this issue and understand, as I think probably most folks on this call have a good understanding of, childcare and family policy issues have long been something that are important to Utah families and the state overall, and to businesses. It was made much more acute by the pandemic, as we saw the disruptions that had on working patterns for Utahns. And now in kind of this post-pandemic world, that question of what does work look like and how can we support our working families? And so what we did was we wanted to really dive in and take an approach that would be helpful to Utah businesses as well as Utah families. And so really, I think the best answer to your question, Natalie, is this is an ongoing, long-standing issue that's been important to the business community. It was made even more important by the events of the past couple of years. And this study in partnership with the Gardner Institute was really the first and important, crucial step to understanding the landscape so that the private sector can be responsive to the needs and preferences of Utah families.
Yeah, very good. Well, it is a treasure trove of information for sure. Representative Pulsifer, I think you can join us voice only. Are you there? Not hearing Representative Pulsifer. I'll ask Nick to follow up with her, make sure we get her technology issues addressed. Sydney, let's go to you. You were featured on the Utah Community Builders State of Good podcast. And in that podcast, you talked about family-friendly workplace policies. Tell us a little bit about your experience as a CEO and how you think about supportive employer policies.
Yeah, I mean, I really think, as Nick just said, this is just such an important and imperative issue for all of our workers and everyone who works with us and the community at large. And so that's what I love about the survey, because I think it's elevating the conversation about a really critical topic. Now, we've been talking about this topic for a number of years. And then when I think about how you implement it inside of companies and what we know and what's really happened over the last couple of years, because the conversation has also changed about what's important and the dynamics that are at play for childcare. You know, as a company who has a large number of women employees and have been a woman myself, right, building a career, this topic speaks really importantly to me. I think the things for me that were also echoed in the data are 3 things. So one is we have, and the pandemic has helped this, we have to move to a culture of accountability for our workers. So it's not about the time that they're in a seat, and that's truly what flexibility means. It means that we have cultures where we hold people accountable, and then we let people work like they need to balance their lives. For me, in the policies that we created inside of our company and in all the companies that I've run over the years, there's kind of 3 core things that I think about. One is people need the flexibility to work how they need to work at any given moment in time. And they need to be able to do that without asking approval. And I think that is one of the biggest keys. It was actually echoed in 2 of those comments there. Right. The thing that holds people back is if I ask, will I get in trouble, versus a culture that just expects that people are responsible. They're going to get their jobs done. They know what the expectations are. And whether they're on a Zoom call or they're at a soccer game, because I've been there many times, or a dance recital, or wherever it is, or a child is sick, that you still have the ability to work from there. And that requires a fundamental shift for leadership to say, I trust my people. I know they're doing their job. And when they have to leave because there's something, or they need to, I do it every morning. I have to take my kids to school. I have to be there when they pick up. You have to be able to support that. And the entire company has to be able to echo that. And I think the third thing is that you really have to invest in technology that allows equality in conversation. So if someone's in the office, that's great. And if someone's not in the office, they still have to feel like they have an equal voice and representation. I think this is one of the things that also has really, that curve has been pushed over the last couple of years. And the pandemic was probably the only thing that could equalize the conversation on flexibility. Most fascinating thing about the data is that it's not anything but remote work and flexibility. Those are the 2 largest things that skew all of the data. That's what everyone needs. They need the ability to live their life, have that reflected in the things they need to do. They need to be trusted in their job, so they're accountable, and they need to be able to feel like they're empowered to make decisions. For me, that's how it shows up. Actually, when they first start and then they ask me if they can take time, or even their managers, like, don't ask, just tell us this is what I need to do, and I'm still going to get my job done. And so we really try to enforce that and then support all of that around them. And it makes everyone more committed, more loyal, and more engaged. And that's what we need from our employees. We want them to stay we want them to love their jobs because we know we support them in everything they're doing.
Well said, Sydney. Very interesting. I love your point about the culture of accountability. And I also like how you distill this down to really remote work and flexibility as two drivers of a lot of the findings. Samantha, would you agree with that those two bedrock sort of interventions are the big ticket items here?
Yeah, they received a lot of the highest selections. I think it does have to do with it, those support people in whatever their arrangement is. Although there are some jobs that don't allow for those to be tools that an employer could use.
Yeah, great point.
Service industry or something.
Representative Pulsifer,
I think one of the
go ahead.
Oh, sorry,
Sydney.
go ahead. I was just going to say one comment on that. I think it's the reason we've seen the gig workforce so strongly come on since the pandemic, because even in places like nursing, which obviously requires you, or service jobs where you have to be in person, we're seeing this dynamic approach to workforce, which is an attempt from employees to solve the same problem. So, and I think what that's going to drive is employers solving it first, so they get the employees they want, because otherwise the employees themselves are like, great, I'll pick up the jobs I need to and the times that I need to because those are available. It's completely driven a new industry in the last 2 years.
Yeah, fascinating. Representative Pulsifer, I believe that you're with us. Are you hearing me okay? Let's see if we can pick up the voice. Perfect. Yeah, great. Yes. Thank you so much. So, Representative Pulsifer, last week, Governor Cox named Amy Winder Newton as the Senior Advisor and Director of the newly created Office of Families. Ms. Newton, Councilwoman Newton, she's well known to all of us because of her elected office with Salt Lake County. She was a candidate for governor. But she's going to be advising Governor Cox on policies, legislation, innovation, sort of items that will strengthen families from all backgrounds and economic levels. The enacting legislation suggested areas of exploration will include parental leave policies and increasing access to high quality childcare. Of course, there were other topics, but I note those two. So the question is, do you think supporting working families is a particular focus for elected leaders right now? And how could surveys and research on this topic be useful to inform these efforts?
Thank you very much. Also, I think I can start video if you can let me. I don't know if you can, but I figured out a workaround to join you today. My experience in the last 2 years in the legislature is clear that elected leaders, particularly the legislature, has childcare as a top priority. Last year, we passed some legislation that was able to allow a lot of things to happen to improve the access to affordable childcare. And it was interesting in doing so that it was a top priority for the legislature in general, for both the House and the Senate, and the legislation that we did pass received pretty much unanimous support all through the process. And it was the conversations that are going on between legislators make it very, very clear that childcare is very important. And what we really were trying to do is increase the capacity, because our system seemed to have not have enough spaces. And as I talked to different parents and so on, the comments were, I just was desperate to find childcare. So our legislation last year was primarily focused on helping to increase the capacity in our system. And I know going forward in the next year, there's already a lot of talk on different policies that we're going to look at to try once again to help increase our childcare policies in our state. And this survey will be particularly important because it's while you're looking at policies, what you really want is not to just guess what we need, but to know, and not just guess what parents want, but to know what they want. So I'm very excited about this survey to help us as we focus on policies that help parents with what they want. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very good. And Susan, I heard you great, and your video's working great. So that's perfect for our event this morning. Can I just ask a follow-up, Representative? I tell people when I interact with young women professionals that by far the hardest thing I've ever done as a professional woman is have young children. And so the question for me, if the state is really thinking about helping with the opportunities and supply of high quality childcare, is the state inclined to lead by example? And the place I think of is the Capitol complex, right? You've got the state as one of the largest employers, and there is a way that the state could provide more convenient childcare opportunities for its workforce. Is there any dialogue along those lines?
That's a very interesting question, and I'm not sure that I've heard dialogue specifically to the Capitol complex. We have heard it in school districts and other, government entities. I've heard cities talk about it and say, we need to do this for our employees, but I don't know that I've heard it in terms of the Capitol complex, but that's a very good thought and a very good idea. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and it may not be the place where there's the most concentration of state employees, but it's just a thought. I find in public policy that leading by example is a really good place to start, right? Sydney, are there any examples of companies in Utah that really do this right? And Nick, I'll ask you to respond to that as well.
Yeah, Nick and I have talked about this a number of times about companies that are, really focused on this. So there's a couple of things that have happened. Pre-pandemic, there was a lot of focus on childcare facilities being really located to the offices. One of the things that's happened over the last couple of years is a very strong conversation of moving that. So like Overstock, they have an on-site childcare facility. It's fabulous. They've done a phenomenal job with that. One of the things that's happened post-pandemic is actually a lot of work is going into thinking about childcare facilities that are closer to where the people actually reside and that are co-funded by companies. And I haven't seen any that are fully deployed that way, but I've been in a lot of conversations recently where you have large concentration. Maybe it's in Harriman, maybe it's in Eagle Mountain, in all sorts of regions, that they're thinking about how do you subsidize that from a corporate perspective when you have a large employee base in one area? Because a lot of times, especially in this remote hybrid world, we need childcare where we live. We actually don't need it in the office because we don't go in the office every day. And so it's driving a different conversation, which I actually really like the opportunity for childcare to be both subsidized by employers and in the regions where your employees live.
Very good. Nick, any comment from you on companies that are setting a really high bar and a great standard for everyone?
I'll just echo and reinforce what Sydney said, that the discussion has shifted a little bit. There are a number of companies, too many to list today, that have been forward thinking when it comes to family friendly policies, either in terms of on-site childcare. Sydney mentioned some of them. I know Intermountain is another one that has a fairly significant focus on creating some family-friendly apparatuses, oftentimes in the form of actual on-site childcare facilities. That we have seen it sometimes a little bit more pronounced in some of the tech sector businesses. Qualtrics is another one that come to mind. So these are company names that we all are familiar with and that we've heard of, and there are a number of them that have had some success doing this. I think that sort of the underlying point from the example of those businesses, as well as what bears out in the data, is that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think the benefit to businesses of this data and this whole dialogue is, I think in the past, the perspective used to be, well, if I want to be family friendly, I can either have an on-site childcare facility that I pay for in my business or nothing. And like, well, that's too hard and too expensive, so I'm just going to do nothing. But what this data shows is that there is a wide variety of what Utah parents want and need. And a lot of it, as was mentioned in the beginning, kind of clusters around that remote work and flexibility preference, which is often much cheaper and much easier for a business. But I think that the key takeaway And what we hope that employers will do with this kind of data is not walk away immediately thinking, well, here's the one solution that I need to go implement, but walk away with the approach of, if I can understand the needs and preferences of my employees who happen to have kids, and then see what kinds of things I can do within my business to be supportive of that. Sydney talks about this in superb fashion in many settings, where it's about equipping your employees to be successful at work and at home. And that I think is the difference of this data and this survey compared to other approaches in other states and at the national level, where Representative Pulsipher kind of touched on this as well. Sometimes, we all have assumptions about what people need and what people want. And if we assume, well, childcare is the thing that everybody needs, we miss out on a talent pool that would raise their hand and say, I would work more if I could have some of these other things, but maybe they're not interested in childcare. And so the key is not applying a one-size-fits-all approach, but having targeted approaches. So where a childcare resource is needed or the preference, that can be really impactful. Where the remote work and the flexibility is needed and preferred, that can be really impactful. And this approach really is, I think, unique to Utah. A lot of other places, the approach is often, how do we get the childcare industry to help align to the needs of businesses, which can have a lot of value. But what we really kind of realized starting out was, if we pull the lens back and say that the real question we're trying to answer is, how do we help Utah parents balance their work and taking care of their kids in the way that works for them? And by filtering the overall question through that way, we've got this really unique approach where we're providing data for businesses so that they can adapt to the needs and preferences of Utah families.
Yeah, very good. And Representative Pulsipher, you made the point that it's really helpful for decision makers to have data to base these decisions on. So that's great. I can see questions coming in, and I encourage you to keep filtering those. Nick is sending them to me, and so I'll jump to some of these questions. Samantha, I wanted to just get your take on this. It seems to me like there's a bit of a perfect storm brewing here. And the perfect storm is a labor shortage, where employers are competing for workers and they're not finding the help that they need. Second, what the pandemic did to demonstrate how technology enables more remote work and more flexibility. And so you got that. And then you add in this rich treasure trove of data that we're putting out in this report. Am I seeing that right? I mean, are you seeing a bit of a perfect storm where this could actually be a difference maker with those three things going on?
Yeah, that's something I was really excited about when we were doing the research. I was thinking there are a lot of businesses or workplaces right now that did things differently during the pandemic, and we're trying to meet the needs of their employees during that unique time. And things haven't swung back to the way they were, and people were able to try out things and find out that they worked that they might not have dared do before. And so now I feel like this is the perfect time when a lot of workplaces are already having a conversation about whether to continue things like remote work options and this kind of thing. They can see the value of this for working parents, and also for other types of caregivers and this kind of thing. It really is something that could support all employees. It's that focus that Nick is talking about of looking at what works best for that employee. That kind of approach, I think, also really would create a positive environment for the employees. So
Yeah.
I do think it's going to be a unique opportunity.
Okay, let me jump to some of the questions that have come in, and all of you feel free to unmute and comment where you'd like. I'll try to direct them where I can. But Representative Pulsipher, someone has asked, and Samantha, correct me if this statistic's not correct, but that 21% said they were dissatisfied with their current work and childcare situation. Samantha, does that ring true?
That's
I want to
right.
make sure. Okay, so we're in double digits here of people that are dissatisfied, and my experience would be that if you've got 5% dissatisfied, that's a problem you got to deal with. But we're in the double digits. Did you see any data, Representative Pulsipher, that surprised you, or does that 21% dissatisfied jump off the page for you?
It actually does jump off the page. I think last year, as we looked at childcare and we had all the discussions regarding the bill that we did pass, it became very clear that, as we said, there's a lot of businesses in different situations. A lot of families have different situations. Their children are different and they have unique needs. And I think that having a lot of opportunities for different kinds of childcare. We have home-based childcare, we have center-based childcare, we have, like we said, childcare in the workplace or the neighbor next door. Having opportunity to have options for families, I think, is a key. And I think maybe that number reflects that. If we can get a greater capacity with greater options, it'll really help families a lot. I think that was one of our focuses last year.
I don't know if any of the others want to comment on that 21%.
Natalie, I'll just mention real quick. To me, that's a huge opportunity, because that data point combined with some of the other stats in the survey report that show people's willingness to look for a different job or a different career if it more closely aligned with their preferences for work and family balance. If I'm an employer, I think, wow, 21% of the adult parent workforce is not quite getting what they're looking for. If I can go provide that to them, and if I can provide the work and family balance that they're looking for, that's a huge potential for me to fill my workforce need.
Yeah. Sydney?
Yeah, I would actually just echo that same sentiment, that when you look at, there are jobs available, and even though we're seeing, variables in the economy, talent is hard to find, and it's way more expensive to get new talent than retain current great talent. So as an organization, if your culture is not supporting families, then people have optionality, and they're taking advantage of the optionality. When you look at the amount of women that have switched jobs, particularly women, in the last year and a half, it is a significant number. And that is demonstrating that they are going to go to places and cultures of companies that work for who they are and what they need. So this is, as Nick said, this is the great opportunity for companies. Take advantage, create great cultures, bring people in, solve these problems, and be an active participant with government and community resources to help solve these and create more options for parents, because we need them. We want their talent. They make us stronger. And to do that, it will require really great creative solutions that have tons of options for parents. We're frustrated because it's hard, and we care so much about our children and our families, members we have to take care of. And without good options, it's frustrating and it weighs heavy on people. That's why they're willing to look for options.
Samantha, this question might be best answered by you. The questioner asks, has a literature review or research background been conducted on other states' efforts in this field? Where does Utah rank in terms of childcare programs or resources, especially since we have higher than average number of children per family? How would you respond to that one, Samantha?
In this particular case, what Nick was saying is true. We were following his lead on a different look at what this is. So there are a lot of other pieces of research that look at how much people are spending on childcare, what percentage of their resources this is, the length of time they might be on waiting lists, and these kind of questions. Those do exist in a lot of reports. And this survey, you have to keep it, you kind of, there's a million questions you'd like to ask, but you have to keep it kind of focused. And this was trying to get at a number of different ways of thinking about what their ideal arrangement would be and what factors would make a difference in terms of moving them toward that. So I think there is a lot of research, but I also think this opens up some additional things. I can think of a lot of research that would be neat to go on from here, building on those kind of two sets of research.
Yeah, great point. Okay, this one maybe ask Sydney to comment on. Sydney, the questioner says, essentially, do you have concern that while remote work and flexible work schedules are highly desired, relying on those without other supports, like formal childcare, leads to some caregivers, especially women, being expected to keep juggling everything and potentially no end to the workday? I guess the question is really asking about the unintended consequences of workplace policies that give you remote flexibility but don't address childcare.
I think fundamentally you have to address childcare. So for family members who work from home, if you're everyone knows you still have to have childcare. It's near impossible to manage both of those. So I think that childcare globally you have to solve it as an organization, how you're going to help people, how you're going to think about it. What remote and hybrid do is they allow the flexibility for decision-making in the moment, right? My child's sick, I'm closer to them, I can take them home. My children are in the home and I'm here working, but there's a childcare or someone taking care, or I've taken them somewhere. Still have to address it. I don't think remote and hybrid are not solving the problem of a parent having to work full-time and take care of children full-time. We have to have those solutions. I do think one of the things, to the comment of juggling and never-ending workday, that does come with remote and hybrid, that doesn't have, and I don't have all the answers on this, but so I think about it from a perspective of my teams and even my own work schedule. Think about it like this: you have full flexibility. Do the things that you need to, work where you need to, balance what you need for childcare. But with that flexibility also comes not an 8 to 5 workday. And so it becomes our own responsibility to make sure we put boundaries around where we're doing. But there have been often times where I'm like, well, guess what? I'm going to leave early and I'm going to go to the soccer game. I'm going to go watch my son play at 3 o'clock, and I'll get back online and work and do all the things that I need to do. And so I think the term of a 9 to 5 job is also going away, because we're allowing flexibility so you can work when you need to, but it doesn't mean that it's only in some set amount of hours. And I think that's also a mind shift for our teams. Doesn't mean we need everyone to work every second of every day. We got to figure out boundaries. We got to figure out all those things. The key to successfully implementing anything is actually communication on both sides. It also is not only the employer's responsibility to communicate, employees have to communicate back what they need, what those boundaries are, what those things are, and how they're going to work, so that we can really support them. Because if someone doesn't tell you as an employer, it's super hard to make sure they're successful in everything they're doing if you don't understand the dynamics at play or when they're going to be available. So I think actually communication is a really important key. We do not expect everyone to work all the time, and we must solve childcare no matter where you work.
Thank you, Sydney. Representative Pulsifer, we're having some policy questions come in, so I'll start with you and let the others unmute if they'd like to address it. The question is, how significant to this conversation is the 12 weeks of parental leave that has become a U.S. standard, and recognizing that many other countries have much more generous policies in place? So is that 12-week U.S. standard a big part of this conversation at this point?
Well, I think what's a part of this conversation is to have leave at all, to recognize that this is another important part, whether or not that number is the appropriate number, whether, 12 weeks is the right number. It comes with the looking at the data that we're looking at, listening to companies, listening to families and parents to find out what that is. But I think the fact that we are recognizing maybe more than we ever have that there is a need for that is the important, crucial part of this. And then be flexible, look at it, see what we might need to, changes we might need to make.
Yeah, okay. And it becomes part, I guess, of the competitive set, right? If you're offering longer parental leave, that becomes part of your competitive position in keeping an employer or attracting one. Representative Pulsifer, another one, can you speak to any current legislative initiatives underway to address childcare deficiencies in the upcoming session? Are there any that will be reinforced or built upon with the data provided in this survey?
I know for a fact of several different things that are being looked at and bills that are being written and proposed. Since none of them are really to the point of having been written, it's hard to address exactly. But I know things that are being looked at in terms of, even tax subsidies for parents with young children. There are things, also businesses subsidies as they look at childcare. I don't know what will exactly come out in the session, but I know there are a number of things that are being talked about and looked about, and ongoing conversations with the childcare community who help us to know what their needs are. So yeah, we've had some robust conversations, and we'll see exactly what comes out. We're just still in the talking phase.
Got it. I will just mention to our viewers, listeners, that there is a report about the childcare landscape in Utah that's been done by the Utah Women in Leadership Project at Utah State University. and we will put that link in the chat. I think that'll be a nice complementary piece to this discussion. Okay, got a couple more questions we'll pull out here. This one, I'm trying to think who to direct this one to. I'll just read it and then we'll see if who wants to unmute. Is there a perceived or possible impact on state childcare programs, such as childcare assistance through the Utah Department of Workforce Services? Additional resources, reform, shifting of priorities, coming out of the pandemic. Have there already been changes made? What are you all seeing in that question? And they're basically saying, I mentioned perfect storm. We got this new data. We've come out of the pandemic. What's been the impact on childcare assistance through the Utah Department of Workforce Services? Have there been any changes, any shifting of priorities? Anyone have a good answer to that one?
I don't know if this
Close enough.
exactly.
Oh, go ahead. You're probably better suited. Go ahead.
I don't know if this exactly gets to that question, but I think the fact that the governor has now put a Department of Family, an advisor of families, speaks to the fact that this has become a high priority in the, state government. I know there's some other talk about combining some resources in the Department of Workforce Services and also Health and Human Services to try to more effectively address some of these issues and needs. And that is, in fact, I've got a meeting today talking about that. So I think because it's really increased, maybe in the last couple of years, it's maybe a higher priority. And the understanding of the need is higher than it's ever been. And there's a lot of things in government trying to be more effective and more efficient in addressing these issues, which I think is a great thing.
Very good. Sydney, do you want to add anything? Okay, very good. We've had someone ask about, and maybe Samantha, you're the best one to start with, but to elaborate on any focus placed on single parent households versus two parent households, and what resources or additional resources are cited as being needed to serve this block of the working population.
Yeah, the single parents were asked slightly different questions, depending on the way that the survey was structured. I'm trying to think through that right now, but I will just say, I think single parents were one of the group, if I'm not mistaken, that was more dissatisfied with their current arrangement. Really work, I think I said it was over 90%. But the percentage of that's full time is also in the 90s. You've got people who are supporting their family, and so I think they're needing more support, and it comes up in a number of ways in the survey.
Yeah. Anyone else want to comment on the single parent versus two parent situation?
I think that the data says, and it's true, we just have to provide strong support and resources for all of our parents, including single family parents, and they have to have what has been talked about, but they're just great options, right? I think one of the outcomes of the pandemic, just related to the conversation we're having on the government side, is we know we've seen a decrease in childcare workers. So we know we have this gap. We also know that part of the pandemic was the shutting down of a lot of facilities, which really impacted women significantly. And when you don't have the ability to balance because you're solely responsible, when you don't have enough resources and when those facilities shut down, it weighs very, very heavily. But collectively, we still have to solve all of those problems. And the solutions are common. We have to find an increase in childcare workers. We have to find more optionality, and we have to find more services. And we're still recovering. The data says we're still years from recovering the childcare workers that we need. It's a significant impact for working families and for single parents.
Yeah. Sydney, maybe stay with you, and I'll invite others to unmute if they'd like to address this. But we've had someone ask about how LGBTQ families fit into the mix of family-friendly work environments.
Yeah, I classify everything as family, right? Whatever the circumstances, it's all about the support needed for people to be their best selves in the work environment and at home. And so it doesn't matter, right? Family, and it's the same reason the tech sector really led out on this, where we also don't just think about maternity leave or paternity leave. It's really about family leave. There are lots of different ways that families look. You have to support all of them. You need inclusive policies that support every side of that. Even in the case of when people are adopting, when there's foster children, when there are sick, when you have people who are taking care of family members who are extremely sick, all falls under family policies. And so what you've seen the tech sector do significantly is move away just from childcare, move away just from talking about it in one specific way and really trying to make it inclusive and find policies that work for everyone in your entire company in situations, because life changes for people, right? Different stages demand different solutions, but at the core of it, it's very similar for what we all need. So for me, it's not there. You shouldn't, everything is inclusive. Whatever you're doing for everyone, and you're doing to support all families, no matter where they're coming from or how they look, because everyone needs support to have great, talented companies.
Yeah. Nick, Susan, Samantha, anyone else want to comment on this inclusive sort of approach that Sydney's described?
You know what, I'll just say that I think this goes along with the idea of looking to lots of different options, and not, sometimes we think of childcare as looking a certain way, and we need to think about it as looking many different ways for many different options, because people are different and their circumstances are different. So I think it just plays into that idea that we need to be look at a lot of different ways to help with this problem.
Yeah, great. Nick, you want to add anything?
I'll just say that Representative Pulsifer and Sydney are both 100% correct, that from the employer standpoint, whatever you can do to support employees who take care of kids, I mean, that's the general focus. It can be broadly applicable and broadly beneficial, both for workers and the businesses.
Great. Samantha, I got a question for you, and then we'll kind of wrap this up, getting close to the bewitching hour. The questioner's asking, were there any meaningful differences between men and women? And then the questioner says, anecdotally, I feel like my husband would probably have very different thoughts on what is needed for our family regarding childcare versus what I think, and then puts a little smiley emoji.
Yeah.
But any meaningful differences between men and women?
Almost entirely, actually. That was a huge category where there were universal, not near, but near universal differences on a lot of different things, where it just, I think I highlighted in this discussion, just for those people who could work more, would it make a difference? They were significantly more likely to say it would make a difference. And I think one of the things that this survey tried to do was ask, about the household, whether it was a one parent, whether it was two parent, but you might get either member of the household on that survey. And so I think that has occurred to me that depending on who you were talking to, the different, you might get slightly different take on how necessary or how interested in working someone else might be, or how much support was needed. Just depending on how that household's breaking down the childcare and work arrangement. But it's such a big group that we were able to see some differences between men and women. So
yeah, very good. Well, for my last question, I'm going to ask the same of all four of you. And I basically am trying to set up a scenario where you're asked to give advice, comment. So let's just assume that Governor Cox has come to you and wants to just ask you the one thing that Utah can do to better support families. The one thing, based on seeing this survey data, what's the one thing we can do to better support parents? And Samantha, we'll go to you first, and then Sydney, Nick, and we'll end with our legislator. So Samantha, what's the one thing that Utah can do to better support parents?
I kind of think just this conversation about that Sydney and Nick especially been discussing, where you talk about whatever is needed for your family, that focus of opening the conversation so that it's recognized that this is an important part of life, and that whatever organization you're working for has that as part of the conversation of how to help you and support you as an employee. So I think all of these are pretty important pieces and tools to support
Great.
the group.
Sydney, what's your advice
Yeah.
to Governor Fox of the one thing that he should focus on?
So my keyword would be acceleration. So we've taken, a lot of steps backwards in the last couple of years. So my one piece of advice is, how do we accelerate optionality? We have to support all the circumstances. We have to support families. Children are critical to our economy, to the growth of our state. And so what can we do to make things go faster? What do we restructure faster? How do we get more options? What do we fund? What do we test and optimize? Like, let's take the software agile development framework, let's throw it into childcare. Let's figure out how we test things. Let's come up with creative solutions, but we have to go faster because that's how we support families.
Nick, your advice.
So I would say this runs right in line with what Samantha and Sydney are saying, but the approach ought to be looking in the data, the portion of Utah parents who raised their hand and said, I or we have achieved our ideal circumstance as it relates to work and caring for our kids, our ideal circumstance that works for our family and our kids. Everything we do should be focused on increasing the number of Utahns who can answer that question in the affirmative. And so any approach that comes up or policy intervention, if we essentially hold it to the test of, does this help more Utah families be able to achieve what they view as in the best interest of themselves and their kids, then we're moving in the right direction.
Great. And we'll give Representative Pulsifer the last word here of your policymaker, but what advice would you give to, leadership in the legislature and to our governor on the one thing that would move this forward?
I love everything that's been said. And I would say, in context of acceleration, keep this as a high priority. And we're going to be finding solutions because things keep changing, but keep it as a high priority. It is so important that we support families in this way. And it's so important we support businesses, and we, in order for us to achieve our business goals, we need to focus on this and achieve these goals for families. So I guess my suggestion would be, keep it as one of the highest priorities that you have.
Great. Thank you for your leadership. I've taken notes here. We need to keep the conversation going, accelerate the optionality, ask the question, does this help Utah families, and keep this a high priority, particularly in a changing environment. This concludes our Newsmaker Breakfast. A special thank you to our panelists for joining us today, and for the authors of the report, Samantha Ball, Diane Meppen, and Kara Ann Byrne. Our next Newsmaker will be Wednesday, October 12th. Stay tuned for further details. If you have additional questions, comments, or feedback, please write us at gardnerinstitute@eccles.utah.edu. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.